So good day everyone. So for today's discussion, we will talk about neo-colonialism and Cold War strategic advantages. So in order for us to understand the topic, we will define first what is neo-colonialism and Cold War. So when we say neo-colonialism, it is a use of economic, political, cultural or other pressures to control or influence other countries, so especially former dependencies. And Cold War is an ongoing political rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union and their respective allies that developed after World War II. After World War II, the colonial empires distinctive of the imperialist era were devastated and countries were economically ravaged. So this is called for the rise of a new stage of imperialism known as neo-colonialism. So the United States and the USSR stood as the two central superpowers after the war and were tasked with the piecing back together in a broken world. So Soviet leaders grew suspicious of the United States, who has left relatively unwanted after the war, and feared they would abuse their unrevealed economic power and fat towards total world domination. So fundamental ideological views and opposing political and economic philosophies led to clashes over disparate visions of post-war life. As the colonial retreat began, independence was expanding and new states were created while many of the former conservatives elites were um, still in charge. Even with the newfound and independence, former colonies would find themselves under the influence of practiced attitudes and understood as a continuation of colonialism in particular aspects, even in, after previously colonized territory has achieved independence. Third world is a phrase that is used to describe a class of economically inferior nations, so or less developing countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So the third world countries are the poorest countries of the world. For example, some of those in Africa, South America, and Asia that have a less developed industry than other countries and in which many people are poor. Since the US was overseas and Russia was super cold, and both of them managed to avoid the worst of the fighting. Not to mention, to fight the wars, both had built up their military. So when the fighting ended and they emerged victories, they had an enormous army and a booming economy. Fractured empires like Nazi Germany would now be influenced by the Cold War and superpowers of the US and the Soviet Union. August Caesar Sandino was a revolutionary who tried to throw the United States out of Nicaragua in the 1920s. So his name and legacy was claimed 40 years later in 1961 by the Sandinista, who fought the dictatorship of Anastasio Somoza Debayle and a Cold War ally of the United States. So the revolutionaries succeed in 1979. Images of Sandino, such as this urban art, are plentiful in Nicaragua. United States and USSR supported the revolutionary movement of the left, or the socialists or communists tried to overturn dictators of the right, so or the capitalists. So the Cold War was responsible for much of the enormous debt accumulated by developing nations. There are two types of nationalism. We have nationalism based on ideas and ideals, and nationalism based on labels. So when cast in terms of human rights or democratic values, nationalism is liberating. So human rights are the arbiter or legitimate and non-legitimate states and governments. So all states are strengthened by assertions that sovereignty is a fundamental human right. In case such as Timor-Leste, who decades-long demand for independence cost from 100,000 to 250,000 lives out of population of just over 1 million. So the support and approval received from the global community with respect to the right and to self to self-rule and their recognition as a state by the UN in 2002. So institutionalized global norms concerning sovereignty. So when nationalism is merely a form of labeling us and them, it is destructive and intolerant. So confrontation with the universalizing perceptions regarding humanity and unfortunately exacerbated tribalism. In the last decades, the world has persisted in an intense and bloody era of the nation building. So one of the tragedies of our time has been the oppression and the violence practiced by the nationalist movement and who make claims the political power based on an ethnic label which excludes and indeed hostile towards other with the different labels. Their only concern is political power, inequality within societies based on race, ethnicity, sect, remnants of caste, and other distinctions of as an identity often prevent a common identity from developing. So many states' boundaries, formerly colonial boundaries, continue to defy the idea of nation by dividing the national group across the states and combining others into an equal power relation within the states. This brief review of colonialism and the Cold War highlights the development of the global economic and political system leading into the contemporary period of globalization. So the Westphalian ideal of equality of states and the non-interference was far removed from the political realities of hegemony and forceful domination. So the stability of international governance was disrupted by the end of the Cold War and increasing demands for democracy, sovereignty, and the human rights. However, the conditions for instability of the global system of states were firmly in that place. So the emergence of weak states with a weak economies and debt, ethnic divides, along with the food insecurity, environmental destructions, population overload, inadequate educational, medical, or democratic infrastructure. So and other risks to human security. So the Cold War made decolonization more difficult and forestalled the development in many countries. So consequentially, the United States damaged its reputation by sacrificing the principles of democracy and its third world activities. So I think this is my end of my report. I hope you guys impart some lessons regarding our topic for today.